Hi. Okay, so I wanted to something that I've been heavily researching at the moment and looking into is I was given guidance to look there, and yeah, I've been quite obsessed with finding more and more information on it. So it's abandonment and engulfment. So I'd like to hazard a guess that everybody involved in a spiritual connection or a twin flame connection is actually, and I'm not decrying, like, thing is, I'm very interested in the psychology, the scientific viewpoint, and the spiritual viewpoint. So I like to meld them all together, and I absolutely 100% believe in soul contracts and have no doubt that they exist. But at the crux of these connections, and I remember reading this in Leora's material a long time ago, and it made sense to me back then. And I remember I always kept coming back to that book. And she talks about the lion and the eagle, and the one person pulling back to gain control, one person pushing forwards to gain control, and the two different sides. And I've lately been finding a lot about abandonment and engulfment issues, which seems to be the crux of the majority of so-called twin flame connections. Now, I'm not at all dismissing that spiritual connections exist. I think we either outgrow them or they can, become more. But it is an unhealthy pattern that is driving this that needs to be healed. So whatever the future is for this connection, it's about looking at the unhealthy patterning that's keeping it from connecting in a unified way. And what I'm noticing at the core of nearly all of these connections is abandonment engulfment. Now, I found loads of amazing links. You only have to put it into Google, and there's loads of amazing articles all about abandonment and engulfment. So I'm not going to kind of go into it too much, but at the crux of abandonment and engulfment is a fear of intimacy. So the core wound is the same. That's why if two people are able to grow together and are able to come together, they will grow in union, because if you've got the core wound of intimacy and one person heals, then the other person can't be triggered anymore. And at the core of the being, both people would want to be together. So if you believe in twin flames, you have to believe that if one person can heal their fear of intimacy, the other one automatically will, because there will be no triggers. Because what triggers the fear of abandonment and what triggers the being engulfed trigger each other, and you will not be attracted to that vibration anymore. If you no longer have those templates, you will not be attracted to that vibration. So they will have to grow and match you, or you will not feel it anymore. On top of that, they're really one in the same. So all of us who have it will have both within, and we will probably naturally flip between the two depending on the environment and the situation and the connection. So abandonment and engulfment both share a common core wound, which is a fear of intimacy, and will have parental issues such as over smothering from a mother-father figure, over controlling. There's several parental setups that can create this, but at the core of it, it's a real fear of being intimate, because you fear being abandoned, or you feel being engulfed and controlled. And like I said, they come hand in hand. So generally, if you suffer from one, you will at least have traits of the other. These two people coming together create fireworks and huge growth for one another if they're willing to undertake it, because a fear of abandonment will either avoid completely, and actually the abandonment one is just as likely to leave the relationship, because the fear of being engulfed will naturally control themselves all the way through. So they will avoid, they will take a lot of space, they will pull back, they will be terrified of being controlled, because they grew up understanding that when they were controlled, it was used against them, and they have a real fear of losing themselves. So the person who's afraid of being engulfed will probably as a rule find it harder to become aware than the one who heavily traits with abandonment, because I know that I have heavy traits of engulfment. problems. And so the problem is you don't realise for a long time, because what you do is you go along thinking, well, I just don't fancy many people, and you become highly addicted to the thrill of unavailable people, and say, oh yeah, but I'm only interested in this like really strong connection, which is fine, but there's a lot of ways when it's actually avoidance of true intimacy, because really it's an addiction to the feeling of wanting somebody who's not actually emotionally available. And anyone who's interested, you'll be bored of, you won't feel a connection to, because really you're just afraid of connecting on an intimate level. So you push all of that away and you make excuses as to why, because really there's a big fear of intimacy and commitment, but you'll make excuses and reasons as to why. And they will generally be that it's because you haven't met the person, and you're not interested in people that are interested in you. And that's the reason why it sometimes doesn't get spotted till later. Obviously, the fear of abandonment is quite quick to register, because you terrified when people leave you fall apart. So that's quite obvious. Whereas the engulfment, you can cover that for a lot longer. And I've had this, and I spent a lot of years thinking that I just, wasn't meeting people that I was interested in. And if I was, they weren't emotionally available. So it was bad luck. And you become so good at hiding your passion and doing it that you can cover it up a lot easier than the abandonment problems. And it really takes meeting one of these connections to kind of bring everything to the light and start to realise you have a problem and start to explore it. And then on the other side, there's the fear of abandonment. So because of that, you see, the fear of engulfment, they can kind of linger around for a lot longer, because they just pull back and pull back and pull back. Whereas the abandonment one will tend to be the person who either avoids the relationship or leaves first, because they're so afraid of being abandoned that they just want to get out and save themselves. There's all kinds of dynamics around these two, but you will probably find at the core of your twin flame connection there is some form of abandonment and engulfment problem. And like I said, you will flip between the two. I want to read out a few quotes actually from a really amazing article that I found, and I will link the source of this below. This was adapted from John Welwood's Journey of the Heart. People often choose a partner with a script that is a mirror reversal of their own. Thus, a person with a fear of engulfment will pair up with someone who has a fear of abandonment. Whenever her fear comes up, she creates distance. This, in turn, brings up his fear, which makes him grab at her, further activating her fear of engulfment. Pressing each other's buttons in this way, they become polarised in mutually antagonistic positions that threaten to drive them apart. His father had been emotionally distant, and this had made him distrustful that a woman could ever be there for him. Thus, he regards her need for solitude and her own space as a constant threat. He is always wary that she might be on the verge of leaving him, and repeatedly seeks proof that she really loves him. She, on the other hand, becomes suspicious whenever men express their affection too ardently or demand hers in return. Her father had turned to his daughter to fill his emotional needs. Feeling overwhelmed by her father's needs and lacking protection from her father, she had learned to protect herself by keeping a safe distance from him. So when he approaches her out of his abandonment panic, she becomes claustrophobic and goes into an engulfment panic. She cannot understand his urgency unless he was like a father out to eat her alive, and he cannot understand why she is so unwilling to give him what he needs, unless she was like his father, distant, punishing and cold. The fights underneath all their convoluted tangles has a single theme: you're abandoning me, no, you're engulfing me. In her conflict with him, she is in pain about feeling engulfed by his need for loving contact. When she opens to this pain, it connects her with a deep wound from her past, her conflicted feelings about needing to be an individual in her own right. Although she will blame him for not letting her have her own space, the truth is that she does not really feel entitled to it. This is because of her guilt about having to push away her father in order to be herself. In a similar way, by exploring the pain he feels in chasing after her, he contacts his old wounds, his conflicted feelings about needing love. Because he had felt so unfulfilled as a child, part of him had come to believe he was unworthy of love. Before he can make friends with his need for loving contact, he too has to become aware of his critic who says, "You're so needy, what's wrong with you?" As they make friends with their needs, he and she no longer feel compelled to project their fears. No longer seeing each other as oppressors, they begin to communicate what they are actually experiencing in their conflicts. When he simply says, "I'm feeling abandoned and scared right now," she becomes less defensive. And when she says, "I'm feeling overwhelmed and put on the spot," this disarms him. The final healing of the rift between he and she happens as they come to recognise, through working on themselves, that both these needs to be strong individuals and to be close to each other belong equally to each of them. As he comes to accept his need for love, he can discover why it has always been so hard for him to feel. It brings up his terror of being left alone. He has hated his aloneness as a child because it was associated with deprivation, which had felt like a threat to his survival. By relating to his inner child in a caring way and educating him to the present situation, that being alone is no longer a threat to his survival, he loosens the hold that his abandonment stories have on him. Through their struggles, he and she have learnt a powerful, essential lesson that relationship, rather than being just a form of togetherness, is a ceaseless flowing back and forth between joining and separating. Just as the moon begins to wane at the peak of its fullness and the tide ebbs the height of its flux, so after moments of intense connecting, two partners naturally begin to fall back into the aloneness. And in moments when they feel separate, a desire is born to come together again. The health of a relationship depends on both partners being able to move freely back and forth between the two poles. Basically, the space is what allows the intimacy to happen. So it's the balance of, because I do really believe that although that clearly defines the two, one is probably covering up the other. So the person who's clinging and chasing and has all the abandonment issues and fears probably also has a fear of being engulfed, and that's why they chase and obsess over people that are not available emotionally. And the engulfer also has a fear of being intimate, so if the other person actually starts to pull back, they will probably start to revert to their shadow self of some of the abandonment chasing issues. So we have both of these within us, and everybody has them to some extent, but I think people involved in spiritual connections have them to a very high level, and they're there for a reason. They're being brought up to be healed, and it's just about being aware of that and to start to do the work on abandonment and engulfment and look at how it's covering a real fear of vulnerability and intimacy, and that's what has to be worked on. And one side will have a real fear of being left, and they just need to learn to be okay with themselves, and that a healthy relationship can have some level of pulling back and they don't have to go crazy. And the other person has to kind of let up some of their control and their walls and try to stay leaning forwards rather than constantly pulling back. And they can be overcome. They're patterns that are here to be witnessed, brought up, and released. So I just think it's really important that everybody who's on in a journey of spiritual connection, twin flame, really goes away and has a look at abandonment and engulfment. There's so much on this topic. There's way too much for me to, because I don't write anything down when I do these. I just start recording and go for it. So there's so much that I could say on this, but it's hard to bring it all up. But if you Google it, honestly, there's so many amazing articles written on it that you don't need to sit and listen to me on YouTube. You can just pop it in. But a lot of people might not have realised that that's what they're going through and that it exists. So a lot of this addiction is, and why you might not have been attracted to many people is because of this, or had a healthy relationship is because of this addiction to people that can't really offer it, because then you stay safe. So have a look into that if you feel inclined, and thank you.